Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Hey.
Did anyone this morning try to join? So I started this meeting about 5 minutes ago. Did anyone try to join earlier than that? And if so, did it let you, or did it like kick you out?
I did. I think it just said like waiting for host to start meeting.
Yeah, that's what it said for me too.
That's interesting. I have a setting for enable participants to join before host, and it looks like it's checked off. So I would like you all to be able to do that so that you we don't all have to join like just whenever I'm on. And then if you all want to like come a couple minutes early and hang out with each other, I would like to have that setting. So I'll try to figure that out. A little disappointing. That's all right. So the first thing that I'm going to do here is I'm going to drop a link to a Google Doc in here, and I'm going to use this as kind of like my my notes throughout our classes today. I'm just going to use this same Google Doc so we don't have too many Google Docs. And I'm also going to share this, but I did want to drop it just so that you could have access to it, follow along if I am not screen sharing. So yeah, let's go ahead and jump into it. So I've got, these are the checks for understanding from the one-to-many lesson yesterday. So I had you all read through that yesterday. So what I want to do to start off here is I want to answer these checks for understanding, and I also want to take any questions that you might have on the lesson plan. So yeah, with that being said, any order we want to do it, if you want to answer one of these questions or if you have a question from the lesson, please raise your hand. This is going to be a very awkward hour. Come on, I asked a bunch of you these questions in check-ins yesterday. I know some of you know this. Liam, thank you.
Well, I'm going to take database normalization. That's where we make sure that our databases are only each keeping track of like one particular thing, or sorry, that our databases aren't keeping track of the same things. Like the example we used yesterday was, I asked if like a restaurant could keep track of the number of dishes that it has, but then if the child dish category, every time we added one, if it could increment up that number of dishes by one, and you don't want that to happen because it can start making things confusing.
So Liam, I might say, you said like keeping track of the same thing. I might say our databases aren't keeping track of duplicate data. And another way of saying that is that, for example, every piece of data is stored in one place. So let me ask you all, can I get another volunteer? If I go back to this lesson plan and we look at this version of the database, So this version from like about halfway through the lesson, what about this database, what about this set of data isn't normalized? Liam, do you think you could take a crack at this one or bump to a classmate?
My guess would be the artist and the hometown isn't normalized, or
Yeah, and I would say this whole thing isn't normalized because something's wrong. So yeah, something's messed up about the artist and the hometown. What specifically don't we like about these columns?
the data is being repeated.
Yeah, exactly. So we've got our duplicate data here. So this is an example of an unnormalized database where we are storing these duplicate records. Yeah. Other thoughts? Let's stick with database normalization now. Sandra, I saw your hand was up from before. Do you want to take a crack at anything else for database normalization? Let's go to Adam.
Yeah, I just had a quick follow-up on that database. So would the action needed to be taken because Prince is displayed twice? Like would the next step be, okay, let's make a separate artist table and get a foreign key? Is that the step?
Yeah, exactly. So in this lesson plan, this is kind of working through that process conceptually. So we've got our unnormalized database here. Correct. The next thing to do would be to break it out into the two separate tables. So all the Prince data we're just storing on one time. And then what we do in this lesson is that we associate these two together using a artist ID for it.
Got it.
Yeah. Other thoughts on database normalization? There's one other key piece that I'm looking for. So this is this is a description of like what database normalization is. So what do our tables need to do, or how do we lay out our tables to ensure that we don't duplicate data in our database? Eight.
Would we have to use foreign keys to get data that we need where it exists elsewhere?
Yeah, so that's one part of it. So we are going to use. Okay, so I'll make a sub bullet here. So to normalize a database, so we need to use foreign keys to relate data together. So we need to use foreign keys to relate data together, as opposed to the previous version of this where it was not normalized. The way we were associating this data together was we were just storing it all in the same row. So we're kind of like, we've kind of exceeded the abilities of a single table and a single row. So now, in order to normalize these data, in order to normalize the data, in order to use foreign keys, how do you have to lay out your tables? I'll say each table should store Mike.
Yeah, I'm not too sure I'm following you exactly, but I think each table should store like only the information specific to that table. So like for the example that we've been doing with set lists, like artists should only have like details relative to the artist, and likewise for the song, so that way like all the information is encapsulated just to what that table represents.
Yeah, so so you're definitely on the right track here. What the table represents, what I'm going to use, I'm going to try to use some of our vocab that we've covered. Each table should only store data for a single resource. So yeah, Mike, when you say like we have artists or we have songs or whatever, that is like a single entity. Conceptually, that's like a single logical unit. And so we store each table only stores information related to that single unit, that single resource. So everything on that table should be related together. If we look back at our other version, we were storing information about both songs and artists on a songs table. So this is how you end up with a non-normalized database, is when tables are storing information about multiple resources. You're going to end up with duplicate data. This looks good. If you all look back at our learning goals, database normalization is something that is a familiar level goal. So this is something that I really do want you to have heard of and seen, but it's not something that we're going to talk about a ton. Yeah, does anyone else want to take a stab at number 2 or 3, or any other questions you might have from the V?
So for the primary and foreign keys, the primary key is automatically generated for you, and it increments every single time that you add a new row. And also it's not constant. Like if you run it again, it will change the primary key.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't mess around with primary key at all. The foreign key is what connects two tables. And so for a one to many, you would go for the many, you would put ID related to the one. So then this foreign key would match with the primary key from the one.
So I will say in a one to many relationship, the one, I'll say the quote, one table has a foreign key to the, or sorry.
Yeah, the opposite, right?
Yeah, you're right. The many table, yeah. So if we're doing like songs and artists, the song, the many table, has a artist ID foreign key. Table. A couple of things you mentioned, V. So in Rails, in Rails, foreign keys follow a convention of, and it'll look like table name and then underscore ID. So whatever table name you're referencing, songs, it would go to song ID. And maybe something else I could add in here is table name singular. So Rails does do a lot of smart manipulation of strings for us. It will pick singulars and plurals. So if I have a songs table, my table name is plural, but when I make a foreign key, or well, in our example, we're gonna do artists. So each of my songs is gonna have an artist ID. The table name is plural, it's called artists. The foreign key is artist ID. So if you accidentally mess up a migration and you name it artists ID, it is going to cause you some issues. Typically, you want to follow the naming conventions that Rails gives you. Similarly, you mentioned, V, that the primary key is auto-generated in Rails. So that's a good reason why we don't really want to mess up with it. In Rails, it's always going to be ID. So both the primary keys and foreign keys are going to have naming conventions. Auto increments and sequence, this is what you were describing, V, of like it will count up for us and we don't really need to mess with it. In fact, you should never manually assign an ID. So let me put that in here. You should never manually assign what? And I've been saying Rails, but technically this is ActiveRecord. What ActiveRecord assign? Cool. We will see an exception to this later, but we'll keep this simple for now. Gus.
Yeah, just a quick follow-up question on that. I mean, like my last job, we had a database that had primary keys that were not auto-assigned, that they were actually imported from another system. So like in that case, we were manually assigning them. So I'm curious, like, is that a Rails standard? Is that like more of like working with like internet database standard, or just like so we don't screw things up while we're learning standard? Like how widespread is that?
So Gus, that scenario where you have data from another database, or maybe it's not a database, maybe it's like a CSV file or whatever, but you have some other set of data, they've already been assigned IDs. So when we port it over to our database, we're just going to keep those same IDs. That is the scenario that we're going to come across in the second half of the mod, where we're going to import data where we will assign those IDs. So Gus, in that scenario, so I'll say this, you always want your primary keys to be auto-generated. You really don't want to assign them. In that example, Gus, where you're like importing data over, I would say at an earlier point in time, they were auto-assigned IDs. When we are porting the data over from one database to another, or from one system to our database, we're just maintaining the IDs that were already auto-assigned. It's not that we're assigning them new IDs. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but you could use, I mean, mostly we're just using like auto increments, but you could use like, for example, on football, like the game IDs were like a more complicated mixture of like the season ID and like the type of game. Like you could use different systems for like auto assigning them, but like generally it should be auto assigned at some point in the process.
Yeah, this is best practice. And in fact, if you, in that scenario where the system has its own kind of ID, so your games, it was like the date and combined with something else, or I don't know, whatever. There was some pattern to it, right? What I would do in that case is I would have one column for the primary key of ID, and then I might have another column for that like pattern type of identifier. So I might have that one called like football ID or something to indicate that this is the ID for this system. It's always a good idea to have these auto-assigned, auto-incrementing, auto-sequenced IDs. Even if you're using another ID, it's good to have this one.
Okay, cool, thank you.
You're welcome. It's very similar to how a lot of times we'll be able to find records by their attributes. Like we will be able to find artists with a certain name or a song with a certain title. We can do that. That doesn't mean that we're never going to use the primary key just because there's an alternate way to do it. Any other thoughts on primary keys and foreign keys? I think this looks pretty good. Another thing that we could say about foreign keys, so getting a little bit more specific about how they relate tables together. So the foreign key, I could say references, or maybe also points to the primary key of another table. So these primary keys and foreign keys are closely related. Foreign keys reference primary keys. Max.
Yeah, can you have multiple foreign keys in one table?
Definitely, yep. And we will see that when we get to many-to-many relationships. So we're doing one-to-many right now, but yeah, many-to-many, we will need to do that. With a lot of these like database concepts that we're covering, we're really giving you the intro to it. And I think by the end of the mod, what Tim and I would like to see is you all kind of like run with it and you know, oh, I can have a foreign key. Why couldn't I have two foreign keys? Like, oh, I can have a one-to-many. Why couldn't I have a one-to-many? And then off of that many, have another one-to-many to another thing. Like you can definitely stack these concepts. Mike.
So would that look like, say you had like a beer that was stocked in many breweries? Would that beer have like a number of foreign keys within its foreign key column?
What would the example of foreign keys for a beer be?
So like, say if a brewery was the parent, but there were many different parents, like many different breweries, like with different primary IDs. Then you had a beer which was the child, but then like the beer was linked to many parents because the beer was stocked in like many different breweries or served there. So in that column of that individual beer, say a Pilsner was in like 3 different breweries, it would have the primary ID from all those 3 breweries. So like for instance, in the foreign key column of one like Pilsner beer would have like 1, 2, 3. Would that how it would work? Or?
Not quite. So what you're doing is, this is great. Like you're trying to like figure out, given all the things that we've talked about so far, how could I create a many-to-many? That's essentially what you're doing. You're creating a many-to-many relationship. So you're imagining a scenario where a beer can have many breweries or maybe distributors or something, and those distributors have many beers, of course. What you will need in that case, I'll just kind of leave this and you can think about it because we will have another class on this. What you're going to need in that scenario is a third table. You can't do it with just the 2 tables. Let's talk a little bit about this third question. So it says, how would you describe the one-to-many relationship between an author and their books? And I want you all to use these phrases. So has many, belongs to, and we'll also throw in foreign key and primary key. I didn't spell forging. Isabel.
I actually really love this example because I think it makes a lot of sense. So if you have an author like Tolkien, for example, he has many books, and then each of those respective books belong to that author. They belong to Tolkien. So you can go through all, like you can go to the Fellowship, you can go to the Two Towers, all of those books, they belong to an author, and then that author still has all of those many books.
Exactly right. Yeah, great job. This does get a little confusing if we think of the scenario where maybe authors could co-write books. So we could have 2 authors on a book. So as a simplification, this only works if we assume that each book only has 1 author. That is what belongs to means, is that it could only have 1. So for that simplification, it works. But that is just to note that like the database relationships purely depend on what data you need to store. Mike.
So does that mean for one-to-many, the child and the parent is a unique relationship? Like it can only be held within them. Like if I come back to the other example, like a microbrewery and a beer, those beers are specific to that microbrewery. Like that can only come from that parent. So it's like it's like a unique relationship in that sense. Like the child isn't shared with other parents. Like it has to be like a locked in dynamic.
Yeah, it's locked in. It's a one-to-many. There's only one thing that it could be associated with, and that's what a foreign key will do. So foreign key, and this is kind of Mike to your other example, a foreign key can only store one ID referencing one other thing. So that's why this is specifically a one-to-many relationship. As soon as we layer in this idea of like, what about many-to-many, all of a sudden our foreign keys are not really, they're kind of limited for those use cases. So yes, this is kind of like a very special relationship where whatever the one side of the relationship is, whatever the many side of the relationship is, that thing is tied to the one side implicitly and not tied to any of the other possibilities that it could have for the one side of the relationship.
Oh, that's real helpful. Thank you.
You're welcome. This looks good. This looks really good. Any other questions from that reading or this lesson? I'm going to scroll through the lesson. Databases. Database. And then we talked about ORMs. Max.
Yeah, I think I'm pretty clear on it, but I was just wondering, what is the most common like tripping up point when referring to foreign and primary keys that you've seen?
When it comes to Rails development, I think the most common issues come down to the migrations and come down to like naming things appropriately. So I think I said up here, like I talked about the naming convention for these keys. So if I'm trying to associate songs with artists, my songs table should have an artist ID foreign key. So if I mess up the migration and I call it artists ID with a plural S at the end, that would screw up my whole relationship. So I'd say like that, like naming things is really common. I think that's probably the most common thing. When we get to many-to-many, I think many-to-many is a little bit more of like, there are more common tripping up points just because it's conceptually, there's more going on. For this one, I think typically I see students handle this conceptually pretty well, and it just comes down to like typos are the main issues. Is Tim here? I don't think Tim's here. That's okay. I'm sure he would agree fully with what I said. Okay, yeah, it seems like we are pretty good on this class. So let's go ahead and we'll take our first break, and we will come back together at 9:30. We'll just be in the same room for All right, it's 31. I'm gonna jump back into it. So we're gonna move on to the active record associations lesson. And I want to start with this warm up here. So I'm going to drop these into the chat for y'all. And it is in the lesson plan too, if you would like to look there. Where is my chat? There it is. I'm going to put you into some small groups to answer these questions. I want to try this Zoom feature for that you all can pick your own breakout rooms, and I've never done this before, so we're going to experiment around and see how it goes. So I'm going to click open all rooms. I have no idea what you all can see right now, but I've got some rooms here and I've labeled them, and I want you to pick whichever one speaks to you, whichever one. Can you all see those rooms?
No.
No.
No. Oh, Max found it.
It's
Okay.
it's in the bottom, like near like the chat button in the bottom. It says breakout rooms.
Okay. Yep. Some people are finding them.
I don't see that.
Me neither.
Me
Yeah, I'm
either.
with you all there.
I can see it, but I can't like jump into a room somehow.
It's okay. So I think probably what we will have to do is we will have to. I think you all might need to update your Zooms. I think that's why.
Actually, I
might
do
just-
see how
where
you can
where it
join
says
it.
like, yeah, where it says the name like sandwich on the right, there's a 0. I think you can click on that 0. Oh, it went away actually.
Sandwich?
I closed them. That's probably why.
Oh.
Is there anyone who wasn't able to see the breakout rooms?
I couldn't see it.
Like you
Yeah.
couldn't
I
even.
could
There's
could
no
not
like
see
button
it.
for breakout room.
Yeah, I
No.
didn't see any.
I can see it when I switch to a premium account.
Gotcha. Okay.
I don't know
Yes.
the premium account, and it just showed up at the bottom down by like share screen. Like
Yeah,
it
same
didn't
here.
notification or anything.
Gotcha. Okay. So I'm gonna do this again. So if I click open all rooms, is there anyone who on their like panel where it says like mute, stop video, all that stuff? There should be a breakout rooms button. There's also a more button for me that I have to click into to find breakout rooms.
All I have is
I don't-
record and
Yeah.
reaction.
Yeah, I don't have that.
Yeah.
So that was a good experiment. I think what we'll have to do is they'll send out some instructions just for everybody to update their Zooms. Okay, well, thank you all for doing that with me. I'm sure I will find a much better use for this in the future. Okay, let me recreate them and I will just auto assign you all. And I'll give you all 5 minutes to talk through those questions. When we come back, we're going to answer those questions. back, everyone. I'm going to call on some people. Let me also share my notes. Yeah. Cool. Let's hear from Mike. What did you all talk about for what is a migration?
It's kind of like a loose term, like a plan to, or like a way to like change your schema. So you make it's like a plan to change it. So you make a migration to like alter your schema in some way, and then once you run your db migrate, it like does that change onto your database. Yeah, it's like a step.
Yeah. Sorry, say that one more time. The last part.
So it's like a stepwise process of changing a schema.
Yeah, sure. Like a step-by-step process for, I would almost say like building the schema. So you can think of it as like over time, we're developing the schema and each migration changes it. Step-by-step process, I love it. It's almost like a set of instructions for building the schema. What I really like that we're doing here, Mike, is that we're distinguishing between the migration is like just the set of instructions. Really important to keep in mind. We have to write and run the migrations. So as you said, the way that we do that is with the command Rails DB migrate. And because our the database could be different depending on what computer this is set up. So if I'm working on my local computer, I'm pushing to GitHub, my colleague is also working on the same repo. If their database is not, their database schema is not up to date, they can run these migrations to change their database as well. Let's go to any other thoughts or questions about this first one? What is the migration? Let's do the next one. What are some things you can do with a migration? We'll hear from Gus, but I see Sydney and V, your hands went up. So Sydney, can we hear from you first?
Did you say me first?
I said Sydney.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. I just had a question really quickly about your migrations or your schema, because your schema essentially is like your source of truth for your structure. So why can't you, or like if you're changing it with your, I don't know, I guess I'm confused. Like if I make a change that I don't want on my schema with the migration, like I almost feel like it shouldn't be going there. Does that make sense? Like since that's like your source of truth. Am I making sense?
I don't think I quite understand.
So like your schema, it's essentially your source of truth for your structure, correct?
Yes. Yeah.
So every migration that you run, like every time you run a migration and you're updating that schema, is that like history being stored somewhere to what it was before?
You can think of your migrations as the history.
Okay.
So since the migrations are the step-by-step process for building the schema, it's essentially the history, the steps that we took to get to the, as you said, the source of truth schema, the current version of the schema. So each migration is like the stepping stone that we took to get to our current schema file.
Okay, cool.
V.
So is it like similar to saving progress?
You can think of it that way, as each it's less of like in a like a Word document where you might save different versions. So I have like version 1, then I say version 2. It's not necessarily that we're saving the different versions of our schema file. It's more of like we're saving the instructions, or we're saving the steps. So I would say less of like saving progress and more of like keeping track of what we've done.
Do you mind giving an example, like of a change that you make in your terminal, and then how you would use the migration?
A change you would make. So can I give an example of a change I would make? So what I would do in order to make a migration, and our lesson plan, I'm going to have you all work through this, so you all get to do this as well. You're going to use your command line tool to write migrations for you. And what that will look like is it will create, migrations are specifically these files. In Rails, they are these files under db migrate, and these are what these instructions look like. But then keep in mind, these are just instructions. In order to execute the instructions, we have to run that Rails db migrate command. V, I'm not sure if that answered your question.
So if you, so you change the schema by adding or removing or updating columns, right? That is how it changed the schema?
Yes, yeah, and let's go ahead and put that down here because that's exactly the answer to this question. So what are some things that we can do with a migration? Well, migrations are all about altering the database schema. And as we talked about on Tuesday, the database schema essentially comes down to columns and tables. So anything we could do with a migration, we could change the columns or the tables. So we could create a table. And then some other things you said where we could like create a column. We could rename a column. So these are all the things that we're trying to do with our migrations. The actual migration contains the instructions for doing those things. Okay.
So the act of changing your schema is the migration.
Is running the migration. Yeah. So if I go to this repo, which is right here, what I would do, so at this point, if I've just run like Rails G migration from the command line and created this, I haven't altered the schema yet until I run Rails DB migrate from the command line. And today's lesson plan will also have you do this process. It'll have you look at the schema, then write the migration, then look at the schema again, then run the migration, then look at the schema again.
Thanks.
Yeah, I'm sorry if that didn't quite clear things up, but I do think working through the lesson plan today will kind of hit on that idea.
Oh yeah, that was helpful. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, I got a bunch of hands up. Let's go to Alex first.
I was just going to say that if you take a level of abstraction, to migrate is to move something from one place to the other. So rather you're herding reindeer, like what we're doing is when we are migrating something in our database, we're just telling data, you lived here, now you live here. Now we can use that to do things like create new tables and columns, but we could do it without altering our schema. We could just be moving our database from one service to another. I know that that's a really common thing just to save cost. So I think it helped me understand what's going on when you're writing these migrations, like you're creating them in ActiveRecord, I believe. But when you run them, you're telling them, hey, you live in our database. That's why it shows up in like post-to-code. So if you're getting caught up on like the rabbit hole of like this migration changes our schema, just take a step back and realize you're just telling data you lived one place, you live here now, unless I'm completely mistaken.
No, I think you're on the right track here. Another important thing to make a note of is we are saying migration, but the full technical term here would be schema migration. So you can almost think of it as like a migration is like moving from one place to another. When we talk about schema migrations, we're taking our schema from one version to the next version. That's kind of how you can think of why it's called a migration. I do want to point out that, Alex, what you're talking about of data migration could actually be a separate topic. The idea of taking data from one database and storing it in a different database, that's a data migration, not a schema migration. So we do use the term migration in a couple of different ways. Specifically, we are talking about schema migration, changing our schema. Adam.
I think you might have partially answered my question with that. I think I was thinking of a data migration. So this affects the schema, the way the table's laid out, the layout, all the options therein, but not the data within, not each row. So my question was, how does this relate to the seeds file? And it sounds like you answered that. That's a data migration. Is that right?
Yeah, you can think of that. And this lesson should cover some of the seeds file as well. So what my plan is, just so you all are aware, is after we're done with this discussion here, I'm going to let you all go and work through the lesson plan on your own, and then we'll come back together and answer some questions. So there are some things that the lesson plan will cover that I'll say, like, just hold off on your questions until we get to that.
Thanks.
Into that. But that is a really good point, Adam, that migrations do not affect the actual data in our tables, i.e. the rows in the table. So we're really just talking about the columns and the tables. We're not talking about the data in those tables. We're not talking about the rows. James.
Yeah, my question is specific to the migration like file you were just displaying. We went over this a little bit with Tim yesterday. That timestamps, he had manually edited the file to add that. Do you know if there is a way to do that when you create the migration in terminal?
I don't
Because it does,
know.
it essentially creates the created at and updated at, and I was trying to mess with it to get it to do it in terminal. I couldn't get it to work. So he had said it's like a special case where you add it manually.
Yeah, I have not, I think I've done the same thing, James, where I'm like, there should be an easier way to do this. And I don't think there is, because truthfully, this is pretty easy. And I do want to make it clear that while a lot of times the Rails generators, so from the command line doing like Rails generate migration, will do a lot of this for you, it is totally okay for you to go into your migration and change it. In fact, sometimes if you don't know how to use the Rails generator from the command line, you might have to do something like this, like Rails G migration to just generate a blank migration.
Okay, awesome, thank you.
I think I do have to like give it a name. So let's say maybe this is my like, okay, so in this lesson, we're gonna write migrations to create artists. If I don't know how to use the Rails generator, I might just say like, generate this migration for me. Oh, and it does assume the create table thing for me, which is interesting. But there's nothing wrong with me manually going in here and saying like t dot timestamps. I spelled that wrong. T dot timestamp t dot whatever. Blah 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 blah. Nothing wrong with going in, and you will have to do this at some point. Edit your migrations. The one thing you want to be careful that you don't do is you don't want to edit a migration that you've already run. Because then you're kind of like, oh, we've talked about how these migrations are kind of like the history of like the steps that we took to build our schema. We don't want to go back and try to rewrite history. A lot of times, because these are all versioned, and if you look in your schema, you'll see that there's like a version number here. If you try to like go back in time and fix something, it might not recognize that change because it's on a version that's forward in time, and like you could really mess yourself up. So you can feel free to edit migrations that you have not run yet. Eli.
So let's say that we've run a migration and it's in our schema and we need to change a few things about it. Would we wouldn't edit the actual migrate file. Would we delete that migration from our like migrate folder and recreate it like via terminal with like all the things that we need in it? Or would we leave it and just add another migration that adds or removes whatever like we were looking to change?
Yeah, I think the same principle applies here. If it is the migration that you are currently like you're developing a migration to edit your schema, that's okay to like edit it. If it's a migration that was like 4 or 5 steps ago, or even 1 step ago, you don't want to edit it. You want to write a new migration to fix it. So let me show you what this will look like. Let me delete this migration here. So if I like do Rails G migration and I say like create artist instead of create artist, this is like a common thing, especially as you're beginning to develop in Rails. Oh, it did it for me. It assumes that the table was called artists. Okay, fine, Rails. I think you're so smart. Okay, so something like this, where I like accidentally misspelled the table name. So like create artists like this. And then what if I actually run this migration? So I'll say like Rails DB migrate. So my schema looks like this. Then I run Rails DB migrate and it should update. There it is. So now it ran my, actually I have 2 tables in here now. I don't know why that is. Oh, I think, yeah, I know why. That's okay. So if something like this happens where you run a migration and you notice that it is misspelled, you can do this. You can do Rails DB rollback. And this is a command. So one thing that we haven't really talked about is that migrations are supposed to be reversible, meaning that you can go back in time if you need to. So that's another reason why you don't want to like edit your history, is because a lot of times the migrations also, the way the migration's written also contain instructions for how to go back in time if you need to. Usually we don't want to ever go back in time. We almost always want to like fix forward, but just in case we have to, this is how you would do it. And there we go. The reason why this artist table is here is from me working through this lesson plan already. That's the only reason that's there. So my artist table that I misspelled, that one is gone. So I could roll it back and then I could delete this migration and do it again and try to do it correctly. So then I would do like Rails G migration, create artists. And that's how that would. Does that answer your question, Eli?
I think so, yeah.
Adam.
So I see you did a create songs, a create artists. How can we just do one migration file and do both of those things?
I don't think you want to do that.
Okay.
And a big reason is because of that reversibility. So if you have a migration that's creating multiple things at once, it would make it a lot more complicated, and therefore a lot more complicated how to reverse it. So typically we just want to do one. We want to interact with one table per migration.
Got it. And if you've got a ton to build, you still just do it piecemeal, one by one.
Yeah, I would much rather see like a huge long list of migrations rather than one migration that's like 50 lines long.
Got it. Thank you.
Sam.
I feel this is probably touching on like the Rails magic part, but in terms of rollbacking, do you need the previous migration file for it to roll back, or will it just know that there was a previous version to roll back to? For example, like in my project, I made one migrate and I forgot I had a column. I needed to add a column. Or sorry, I added an extra column and I want to go back to a version where I didn't have that column. Do I need that previous migrate file, which was missing the column, to roll back there?
You need that? Yes, yeah, the migrations are what tell Rails how to go back in time. Now, in that case, Sam, what I would prefer that you do is fix forward. So that's an example where I added a column that I don't need, run a migration to delete that column.
Okay.
Or sorry, create and run a migration.
Okay.
Gus.
Yeah, so in the course of yesterday's class, like at one point we were getting an error that was like pending migration error. If you get that, like, is it basically like if you create a migration and you don't do db migrate, then that happens? Like is there a way to like cancel the migration without, is that just like deleting the file? Does that do that? Or like if you create a migration but you don't want to do db migrate, is that a thing you can do? Or are you kind of like stuck at that point, like completing the migration and then just fixing it with a new migration?
I can't think of a scenario where you would want to create the migration and not run it.
Okay.
Typically, if you've created the migration, it's with the intent of running it immediately. Yeah.
Fair enough.
So if you, the fix for if you get something that says like schema is out of date, run Rails DB migrate, the solution is always to run Rails DB migrate. Unless for some reason there is an erroneous migration. So it's picking up on a migration that you didn't mean to make, maybe you accidentally made it, maybe you're working through a lesson plan and you accidentally just put the Rails generate command in the wrong terminal output, like that happens. But if there is a migration that you purposely made, you almost always want to just run it.
Okay. So when you did the rollback and you deleted the file though, like does that, you're just getting rid of something that you know you don't need at that point? Like.
Yeah, and that comes down to the principle that I talked about of if I am developing it right now, if I'm developing it currently, it's okay for me to like make a mistake and then change it. If it is a like previous mistake that I've already made, I don't want to do that.
Right. Got it. Thanks.
Vicky.
So like at what point of all the steps that we have to go through, for instance, for the project, at what point we do the migration, and doesn't matter when you do it?
Yeah, I would say you need to do your migrations. I would do them as I'm developing the CRUD pages. So the first user story that we have for you all is to build, I think it's the parent index. At that point, I would write a migration to create that table. I wouldn't create any of the children at that point because I don't need them. So I'm really following the like TDD, you ain't gonna need it, like all these principles in coding where or KISS is another principle, keep it simple, silly. Typically you don't wanna like create a migration until, you don't wanna do anything until you need it. The same applies with migration. So I would not go about migrating your tables until you need that specific.
Okay, so before you start the first, but during the process of the first story is when you create. Okay, cool, thanks.
Yeah, that would be my first create. And then when I got to the child first story, that's probably when I would do the migrate for the child. Phil.
Hey, quick question on just like naming convention for migrations. So we've done a couple here. It's like create table. I was just curious when you go change something, what is like the camel case version of that when you type it in Rails or in the command line?
I'm not entirely sure. So like maybe let's come up with an example here. So what if I wanted to just remove the play count field? So let's try like remove play count. And let's see what that migration looks like. I think create is the only one that I rely on for the naming conventions. Yeah, so with almost everything else that when I'm not creating a table, when I want to like change something, typically what it looks like is I will like I will just like make a camel case or a snake case name for it, but I'll have to actually manually write it myself. So I think create's the only one that it picks up on for you. And let's just go through this whole process. So let me Google like Rails migration cheat sheet, because this is something that I would expect you all have to do. Oh, look at that. It looks like there is a version. Rails G migration, remove part number from products, part number 10. Let's try that. So I've just generated a migration that I don't want. Let's just delete it. And let's try this version. Remove play count from songs. And then I think I had to specify, what did I have to specify? Part number string. So that would be column name and data type. So play underscore count integer. Let's see if that works. Yeah, it worked. Cool. So the answer to your question is yes, there are some other camel case things that you can do to automatically pick up on it. However, I think a key takeaway here is as these migrations get more complex, you are going to have to look this up. And a lot of times you are going to have to manually, I mean, in this case, we didn't have to, but there are occasions where you're going to have to look up the actual syntax and write it out yourself.
Perfect. And then just a quick follow-up on essentially like naming migrations similar to Ruby convention, just like make it a good name that's descriptive that someone could understand later.
Yeah, if you're not relying on the like auto-generated thing, just like a name that makes sense. What you probably mentioned the column that you're referencing and what you're trying to do with it. So this column, I'm deleting it. This column, I'm renaming it, blah, blah, blah.
Cool.
Max.
Yeah, so I was wondering if conventionally it's bad to have like lots of migrations. So let's say you, because I know in our project when we first made the tables, we didn't put in all of the columns, and so then to add a column one by one, and then if we make a mistake to then delete it one by one, so we could end up with like 20 migrations at the end when we only have one table. Is that a bad thing or is that okay?
No, that's okay. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with having lots of migrations. In fact, I would say it's better that you have those 20 migrations so that it really reflects the change that the schema went through. That is better than like deleting all of your migrations and then rewriting them so that they look prettier. Like it's much better. I almost think of it as like honesty here. Like let's just be honest about the steps that our database went through to be changed. And there's nothing wrong with like keeping that documentation around. Yeah. And in fact, what I said earlier, if you do like try to go back and rewrite history, these version numbers can get out of sync and you can kind of get into some trouble. Let's jump back into these notes real quick. Can I get someone to answer this question? What is the relationship between a migration and our database? Max, what do you think?
Is it just that migrations are the language that the database uses to update itself? Is that?
Yeah, so migrations update the database. And in what way do they update the database?
It's a set of instructions for basically creating a database. But if you're at a certain migration place, you only run the new ones.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. Let's hear from Ryan.
From what I understand, the migrations are going to be affecting the structure of the database, and that's all they deal with is the schema of the database. Is that?
Yep,
okay.
You got it. Yeah. So Max, important distinction here. We're updating the database schema. So if we just say update the database, that could imply that we're updating the data in the database. Migrations, we're not touching the actual data. We're just touching the schema or the structure. Okay, so I think this is a good place for us to wrap up with this section. What I'm going to have you all do next is I'm going to have you do a little bit of choose your own adventure. So what that is going to look like is, so this is the lesson plan right here for active record associations. This is a tutorial based lesson, so I don't want to like sit up here and just like do the tutorial for you all. I want you all to work through this tutorial. There are two different versions of this. So if you looked at this lesson plan, I think I merged these changes last night or maybe last afternoon. So if you looked at this lesson before last afternoon, you are probably most familiar with this TDD version. So down here, I've linked TDD version. This tutorial does not make use of any testing. You can find a version of this tutorial using the TDD workflow here. So this will link to this older version of this lesson, which is essentially the same thing, but it adds in testing. So what I want you all to do, oh, and I'm still looking at my localhost version. That shouldn't matter. Let's just make sure we're all looking at the same thing. Yeah. So what I want you all to do is I want you to work through this tutorial. I want you to work through one of these two versions. So either this version without TDD or this version with TDD. So I think if you are, if you feel like you really have a handle on everything from today between like migrations and the new content that we're going to layer on here is our active record associations, which is our has many and our belongs to. So if you're familiar with those maybe, then it would be a good idea to try the TDD version. So I feel pretty good about these concepts. Let me try to add in testing and see if I can get a jump start on testing. If you're not at that point, that's totally fine. If you're still, if you feel like I want to really understand one-to-many and migrations and I don't know what these active record associations are, I just want to take it slow and do one thing at a time. Nothing wrong with that at all. And you can always work through the TDD version in the future. Yeah, so I want you to pick one of these two lessons, and I think I'll let you all go for about 30, let's say 40 minutes on your own. So we'll get back together. We'll come back together at 11 to check back in together, and we'll like do questions from there. And I will I'll write these instructions in the Slack channel too, so that you have them. Does anyone have any questions about what I want you to do?
Are we staying in the room, Brian?
You don't have to stay in the room. I will leave this open just in case you want to jump back in if you're like having an error or there's like a version issue or something, like your bundle isn't working. I'll be around for support, but you don't necessarily need to stay. Go ahead.
I'm sorry if I missed this, but are we building this application from scratch, or are we using like set list or something that is already happening?
Thank you for asking. This is building off of setlist. So what we're going to try and do moving forward is to include a link to a repo with the completed code. So this lesson builds off the handling request lesson. This just links to the lesson plan itself. You can find completed code from this lesson on the handling request branch of this repo. So this is our Turing School setlist repo. And what we're planning on doing is we're planning on pushing up the completed code from each of those from each class into its own branch. So handling requests will have all of the completed code from handling requests. And if you need help, like checking out this branch or like getting set up, that's another thing that I'll be around in this room if you need help with that.
Okay, thanks.
And of course, if you wrote all the code from the last lesson, you don't need to use this lesson. You could just use your own. You don't need to use this repo. You can just use your own local copy. That should be fine. Anything else? All right, y'all, go ahead and get to work. Feel free to jump out of this room. If anyone has any questions right off the bat, go ahead. Just a heads up for any of y'all, I just put this in the cohort channel, but the TDD version does not cover seeding, and the other version does. So if you're working through the TDD version, just open up the other version and check out the seeds section when you're done. It's pretty short.
Hey, Brian.
Yes.
I'm getting when I'm trying to create the foreign key, I'm getting references is not a variable.
Can you share and show us what's going on?
I think I had this issue. You have to exit the Rails console.
Oh, why?
You're in the Rails console. I think it's a method.
Okay, so just get out, get in, and it's gonna work?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yeah, Brian, I had a question.
Yeah, what's up?
We're supposed to clone down the set list repo, like from the top, the handling request repo. And when I cloned that one down, it already had the artists and the whole relationship done. So it's like the first part of this lesson is not, I'm not doing anything. I'm just kind of reading through it.
Mm-hmm. So what you'll need to do is you'll need to check out the handling request branch.
Okay. Yeah, I believe
that should do it.
Yeah, I went to the link and it is handling requests, and then I clone it down.
Yeah, when you clone it, it will always like automatically put you on the default branch, which I think is main.
Oh, my mistake. My mistake. Okay, thank you then.
Yeah, it's, getting out and in again did not work.
Didn't work. Can you? Let's take a look. What's going on? Oh, you're still in that IRB session. It looks like it didn't actually exit.
No, I did here.
Yeah, but you see, here, let me draw on your screen a little bit. This prompt right here, IRB main, this is telling us that we're still in that Rails console. So yeah, try to do exit again. I think it might just be stuck. Yeah, it looks like it's working now. So now you're back in the Rails console, so exit out of the Rails console.
I don't understand what I'm doing.
Gotcha. So this command right here, whenever any of these commands that start with Rails, these are commands that you have to run from just your normal terminal session. So not from any, not from IRB or anything. When you see Ruby code that we're executing like this, like artist.all and artist.create, this is code that needs to be executed inside the Rails console.
Right. So the Rails G migration, you have to do it inside the Rails console.
No, you should do that outside the Rails console. So any command that starts with Rails is going to be outside of the Rails console.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah, as you start learning Rails, there's just so many things that it's just like a lot to keep track of.
Right.
I think it can get easy to mix things up, for sure.
That makes sense. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hey, Brian, I'm back. Could I share my screen and go through the setup, because I'm still getting like the completed thing and not doing. It's just I'm gonna need a help. So here I am on. Let me just start from the beginning. So I go to Slack, and we go to this one, a little link, and then I'm gonna go to this repo. Lesson builds off completed lessons handling request branch. So I click that, and I'm gonna get, because I'm on the I feel like I'm on the handling request branch. When I go to your code here, like it only has songs. So I know that's right. I go right here and I just copy this, right? Okay. And then I go to my terminal. Ooh, if I can get it all right, and then git clone, and then that. And then if I cd into setlist, I do atom dot. I go to, yeah, it's giving me both of them. And when I do, I tried to look for like, is there another branch? It only gives me main. So it's like it's bringing down the whole thing and it doesn't have the branches.
Yeah, I think this is a Git quirk. Can you do Git checkout handling requests? No dash P.
Okay.
There you go.
Okay.
So
well, I guess
so
that's,
yeah, I don't know why Git does this. Yeah, you're right. It seems weird that you can say Git branch and it doesn't show the branch, but somehow you can check out the branch. I don't know why Git does that, but that is how it works, unfortunately.
okay. I'll try and remember that. Okay. Thank you so much. I'll work from here now.
Something to add to that real quick. I think we had this issue in our last mod. If you do git pull -- all, it'll pull all existing branches from GitHub down to your local.
Should
I think that's
okay.
And then it would show git. Then if you do git branch, it should show the branches that you pulled down.
Git pull. What was that? Git pull -- all.
All, yeah, lowercase. I think that's the how we figured it out.
Okay. I only see handling request and main still. Was there any other branches up there? There was AR associations, so I don't know if it pulled all of them.
Okay, maybe that wasn't it. Then I know there was some way that we figured out how to pull all the branches down that existed.
Okay.
It might be fetch. Git fetch -- all.
Yeah, git fetch -- all. When I do git branch, I still see only handling requests and main.
Yeah, and as we just saw, Ryan, like you could check out that branch even though it wasn't showing up in Git branch. So when you clone a repo, you do clone down the branches as well.
Mm-hmm.
But it just doesn't list them. I don't know.
For some reason, yeah. Okay, that's a quirk. I'll get back to the lesson.
Hey, Brian, what is the difference between when we did artist.create name Talking Heads and Prince and Britney Spears, and then when we do the prince equal artist create name prince. Why do we need both?
Gotcha. So the first one, the first version is the migration. So that's going to change the structure of that table. So it's going to create the table, and it's basically going to set up the structure for us to store artist information. When you do artist.create with name of prince, that is actually creating the data. So the migrations set up the structure for storing the data. The artist.create, that actually stores the data.
But didn't you say that migration does not alter the roles?
Yes, that's correct. So artist.create creates a new row.
So why do we need then, if it doesn't add to the roles, if it's just like adding attributes, why do we need the names when we are doing the migration?
Why the name that when you say like Rails G migration, create artists and then name string, that is that's creating that column. That's why you need that. If you didn't have that line, what we would have is an empty table with no columns. So when you try to create an artist with the name of Prince or whatever your artist name is, it's going to say it doesn't have a column called name to store that.
Yeah, that part I understand. Like, but after that, I think I'm getting a little bit lost. When you do artist.create, you said that this is the art, not assigning to a variable or anything. You just do artist.create name talking heads. You said that this is the migration, right?
No, that is an ActiveRecord command to create a new artist.
Okay, so that is what I don't understand. If this part is creating the artist, then what are we doing when we get to the one-to-many relationship and do prince artist.create name prince?
Gotcha. Could you share your screen just so we're looking at the same thing?
Yeah. Okay, so this part here, what are we doing here?
There you are creating new rows. So each one of those artist.create is going to create a new entry or row or record in your artist table.
Perfect. And then
that's not the migration. The migration was earlier than that. So the first migration is right there. Create artist, create table, that.
Okay. And then what are we doing here? Like, why are we creating the prince again?
Oh, yeah, you're right. We are kind of duplicating it. You're right. You probably wouldn't need to create a new one. You're going to end up with duplicate princes, but that's okay.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, I think you're on the right. I'm glad that you cleared some of that stuff up. Yeah.
Hey, Brian. I happen to have a question for you, sir.
Yeah, what's up?
Could I share my screen again?
Mm-hmm.
There we go. So let me give you some context. I just put in the Rails G migration, the first part, and I put in the timestamps here. And then I ran Rails DB migrate, and it runs into a songs has already been standard error. It's a duplicate table. Do you want me to reset the database? Would probably fix it. Or?
It says relation songs.
Oh, I think I have.
Exists.
I have you muted. I'm sorry. Okay, I can hear you now. I was.
Cool. You didn't miss anything.
Okay.
Yeah, it's interesting. So it says songs already exist. So I think what you want to do, because you've cloned down a new repo with new migrations and schema, like those are all going to have different versions.
I'd have to create the database?
Yeah, so this is a scenario where you want to drop and create the database.
Okay, all right. I'll do that. So Rails DB drop. We could chain them, right? With do just
if you delete drop up to the colon.
Okay.
And then do a curly brace. Yeah, right there. Then a curly brace, open curly brace, and then drop, comma, no spaces, create, comma, migrate.
Oh, comma, migrate.
Yeah, so you can just do them all three at once.
Okay.
Yeah, try that.
Okay.
And that's what, if you see me doing nuke in my terminal, that's what nuke is.
It's like a short. Did you make that yourself? Like that's a custom
yes,
one?
I made that. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I was wondering. I'm like, that's not in any docs I see, but okay.
It looks like it accepted those migrations, so I think you're by contract now.
Okay. All right. And I could see it's got artist and songs now here in the schema. So thank you. That was my my hiccup. All right.
Hey, Brian.
Yes.
What is that? The file the migration called create. Let me see it. I'll share my screen. Okay, so this one here, it was created once we created the foreign key, right?
No, this table was created before we added the foreign key. So the next migration, the one right below it, that is the one that adds the foreign key. So that second one that you were just on, that one creates the artist table. And then the second one adds the foreign key on the songs table.
Okay.
So the songs table should have an artist ID for it.
But they pop up at the same time. So we did both at the same time?
They shouldn't. If you go scroll up to the top of the lesson plan, I'll mark where we did them. Keep going. Yeah, so right here, that's not what I wanted. This command right here was the first time where I just put that aside. That command is the first time where we create the artist table and then scroll down a little further.
Okay, so this one created this file here, right?
No, the second one.
Oh, this created this one.
Yes.
Okay, and then this one is the one that was created when we added the foreign key.
Yes.
I think that I got confused. Creative artist. Let me see the part that says look at the create migration.
Yeah, so this command we ran right here generated this migration, which is this third one.
Oh, okay, now I get it. And there was another thing. Why are we doing this part before we do this part?
Oh yeah, that's very similar to your comment before of why would we create a new artist if we already have one. So this find by is finding that artist that we created up here on this first line.
Okay, thank you.
So if you're running the same terminal session, because we created the same IRB session, we created this variable prints on this line right here. If we're in the same session, we wouldn't actually need this line because we already have access to prints. So this line is just, if you don't already have this variable stored, we could find it with this.
Oh, so it's similar to like scope. You have to do it again because that session does not know about that thing.
Exactly, yeah. If you had exited out, that variable would now be out of scope.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, Brian. I have a question on doing an artist method. Is it okay if I share screen? Because it's possible I'm just reading this wrong, but it's confusing to me. So I have the average song length. And when I ran it on prints, this is the return value it gave.
Okay.
And I'm not sure why that's the average length. Because here it says print says 2 songs. And so we should be getting around like 400 and something.
Yeah, so that number, that scientific notation, that is the number 434.5.
Oh, I understand. E3. Okay.
It's a weird syntax. If you do, so you can use the underscore in your terminal to represent the last thing. So then you could say dot class on that, so we could see what type of object we're working with. And we consider this as a big decimal. So this is this is another thing that I don't know why this is like this in Rails, but for some reason Rails uses this big decimal class pretty frequently. Even though it's outdated, even though typically we will use integer and float classes, for some reason Rails still uses big decimal for some things. And big decimal is just from an older version of it.
Great. So if I did this, okay.
Yeah, but then keep in mind that took off the precision of the half
Right.
there, so you would want to go to 2F there.
Great. Okay. Awesome. Thank you.
Hey, Brian, quick question. Oh, sorry.
No, you go, James.
Just real quick, when will we dive into RSpec and testing? Because I was looking at that plan, and I haven't gotten into the testing side yet, but I'd like to.
Yeah, I'm gonna talk about it this afternoon. Yeah, so that's when we're gonna start
awesome.
with feature testing.
So, Brian, is this using a method in like class artist? Is that how you could have a column that was like how many songs the artist has?
Oh, so Max, jog my memory. This, so you said that you had the, was it the restaurant and the dishes? Was that your example from yesterday?
Sure. I think so. Yeah.
Okay. So you don't want, so what you might think in this case is you might say, like, we could store, if we wanted to know how many songs an artist has, we could, Max, this is what I would like to do if you're down for this. Could you ask this question when we come back together as a group? I think this is something that.
Sure thing.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Let's go ahead and talk about some of this together. Actually, the first thing that I want to do, I want to do a little bit of polling. Can I get a yes from everybody in the participants panel if you were able to work all the way through one of the two tutorials that I dropped? Cool. So it looks like most of you all, maybe not all of you, but most people were able to get through one of them. I would recommend that you look through both of them at some point. I dropped a message in the channel, but this ActiveRecord Associations is the one that I've been working on. So this one, I tried to add in a little bit more explanation. So I think that there is some stuff in here that you might not necessarily find in the TDD version. I tried to do like a little bit more of explanation on like what these ActiveRecord associations are doing. I mentioned the seeds file, that is not in the TDD lesson plan either. And then the TDD lesson had you write the test, but it didn't actually have you write the methods. So the methods are here in this lesson plan. Conversely, if you work through this lesson plan and you didn't do the TDD one, I recommend that you do the TDD one at some point just to get a little more familiar with TDD. That's kind of like a good resource for just getting into the habit of TDD, especially at the beginning when we're not super familiar with TDD yet. Yeah. So what I want to do is similar to the first class for today, I want to go over all these checks for understandings, and I also want to answer any questions that you all might have. So go ahead and put your hand up if you have a question from the tutorial that came up, or if you want to take a stab at one of these checks for understanding. Oh, and we can start with Max. Can you ask your question?
Sure. So I had a question on like within the artist model. So we made that average song length method. And if you could write another method that would auto-populate a column. So if you wanted a column for your artist that was like the number of songs that artist has, and that would you write that as a method in the artist model that would constantly like count songs? Gotcha. Or how would you approach that?
Right. Let me do this first so that I have the completed version. This is useful for you all to see. So I'm trying to check out a branch. I mentioned earlier that I'm going to try and like keep this set list repo up to date with all your completed code. You might run into something like this where it says your local changes might be overwritten, and it says to my DB schema file. So what I can do if I don't want those changes, if I don't really need them, so if I do git status, it'll tell me you modified your schema and you've got these untracked files here. So I can say git stash from the command line. And what that will do is it will take all my changes not staged for commit, and it will just kind of store them away. So now if I do git status, I won't see that schema file anymore. Now git stash, you can only stash things that you're already tracking. So if you have a new file that is not yet tracked in Git, it's not going to see those. So if I want to also stash those, what I can do is add them. So I'll do git add dot, but then I won't commit them. So I'll add them so that I can stash them. So now if I do git status, my working tree is clean. So now I should easily be able to check out AR associations. And I could, if I switch back to handling requests, if I want to get those changes out of my stash, what I can do is pop them. So I can do git stash pop, and it will undo them in the reverse order that you stash them. So because I stashed the migrations second, it's going to pop those off first. So if I do git status, I can see these are in my migrations are the ones that it popped. And then if I want to get the first one that I stashed to the change to my schema file, I'll do git stash pop again. And now I've got my schema back as well. So if you aren't familiar with Git stash, I'd highly recommend that as a tool to add into your Git tool belt. And I'll just stash all these again. So back to AR association. Before I go on to this idea of like storing like a count of songs, does any other questions on like Git or like checking out branches? Or...
One question, Brian. Is there a way to see like how many things you have in the stash? Like have list out like I have three items in my stash?
I think so. Git stash list. Yep, that's it.
Okay, thank you.
So then if I like, so like, let's just do something like totally, like I'll just hammer on the keyboard here. Do Git status. Oh, I've made a change. Let me stash that. So we can see that disappears immediately. So now if I do Git stash list, I will see the list of these things. And so if you wanted to like if you wanted to remove, like undo, or sorry, if you wanted to pop something specific off of your stash, I think you could copy and paste this. So I think you could say Git stash pop and then stash M1.
Oh, cool.
So there's a bunch of cool things you can do with Git stash, but I think the most important thing is just Git stash and Git stash pop are two commands you can get familiar with. V, did you have another Git question?
Yeah, just to confirm that I understand what stash is doing, you use that when you're not ready to add and commit and you want to remove branches?
Yeah, it is useful for moving branches. There are other use cases, but this is a common one is you want to save some work that is not quite done. You don't want to commit it. So you can kind of think of your stash as like a workspace, like it's where a bunch of like in progress work is held that hasn't been committed yet.
Gotcha, thank you.
Okay, back to Max's question about what if we wanted to be able to count the number of songs in our database? So let's look at our schema the way it stands right now. Schema. Okay, so I'm going to type in the schema. Again, I said this earlier, or Tim said this yesterday, like you don't want to actually edit the schema file directly. I'm just doing this for notes. So I'm not actually like trying to change it here. So what would happen, or maybe what would be the problem if we did something like this? If our artist table had a column on it, oh, sorry, it would actually look like this. Maybe like integer, and then song count. So like we're trying to store a column on our artist table for the number of songs that it has. Why might we not want to do this? Isabel, what do you think?
If you've already ran a DB migrate, this will not actually show on that table because you've already kind of like pushed the migration to your database, and this won't do it. Also, if this like put out any errors, you couldn't roll back a migration.
Gotcha. Okay, yeah. So you are answering the question, why don't I want to edit this schema file directly? And yes, that is correct. So this is not actually going to reflect the changes, and we're losing that migration history. So let me do this. Let me do Rails G migration, just so you all can see another example of this. So let's say add song count to artists, maybe. So this is going to give me my empty migration file. I could do some like try to do some magic to make it assume what I'm going to do, but this is really more of what this will look like when I do this. What did I Google before? That was migration cheat sheet. And for these simple like one column things, I would typically do something like this where I'll copy and paste here and kind of reformat. So add column to my users table. So I actually want to add this to my artists table, and we're going to call it song count, and it's going to be an integer like this. So then I can run this with Rails DB migrate. So that's what that would look like. That's a very realistic example of when I want to make a migration, change a column. I'm going to generate a blank migration. I'm going to look up how to do it, and I'm going to write the migration. And then I'm going to double check that my schema changes appropriately. Okay. Okay, so now that I've got this change made to my database, what potential issues could we run into with this like song count column? Grayson?
So the issue with having something like a song count in there is that you already have that data stored just as a function of the database, where you can already find the number of artists that or songs that belong to an artist through the database. You don't need an extra value for that.
Right, exactly. So can anybody, given some of the like vocab that we've talked about today, maybe from the beginning class, what are we not achieving with our database here? We're like duplicating data. Aiden?
Would it be like single origin of truth not working? So, or single source of truth?
Maybe, but I want to stick with the vocab that we've talked about today. Alex, what do you think?
The database isn't normalized.
There you go. Yeah, the database is not normalized. So storing this song count here, just like Grayson said, we're duplicating data. We are now storing information about another table on our artist table. So our artist table is no longer normalized. It is now storing information about two separate tables. So this is the main reason why we don't want to do this. You can imagine every time we add a new song to our songs table, we would also have to increment the appropriate song count. So anytime a database change forces you to change something in two spots, maybe this is more of like a general programming thing. Anytime one change forces you to change things in two spots, that's a sign that maybe you have two things doing the same thing, and you should combine that into one thing. So always in programming, we want to stick to our dry principle, do not repeat yourself. We only want to store things in one place. We want to have, Aiden, it wasn't necessarily that you were wrong. Single source of truth is a good thing to stick, good thing to stick to. Aiden, do you have any other thoughts?
No, that was an old hand. Sorry.
Okay, cool. Max, is your question, can you answer my question?
Well, no, so I was just wondering, so it seems like you understand that my question was a little bit more specific on, can you have a column that is auto-populated based on other information in the database? And it seems like you're saying here that you wouldn't want to do that necessarily, but in a case where you would want to like take that table and have, or even just display information that was calculated based on another table, is that something you would, how would you do that, I guess, is what I'm saying.
I think this average sum length method is a good example of that, where we are making a calculation based on some other data. Is that kind of what you're getting at? Yes,
but would we only like access that through our like Rails C interface?
No, you would use this in, so now that we have this method, we can call this on an artist instance anywhere in our application. So if we had, is there any place we can do it? Song controller. We'll build this out this afternoon. So we will see an example. So because this is defined on the technical answer to your question, Max, is because this method is defined on the artist class as an artist instance, we can call this method on any artist instance we have anywhere in our application.
Gotcha. Okay. And sorry, one follow on to that. I know that in the last mod, we briefly touched on doing class methods. What would a class method look like on artist? And would you ever want to do that?
Yeah. Well, so a class method, you'll remember from mod 1, or you might not remember this. Yeah, as you said, you all briefly touched on this. The way we define a class method is with def self dot, like this. And so maybe an example of a class level artist method would be, ooh, this is a tough one. Yeah, this is a tough one. I really can't think of. Let's do one on the song model. And by the way, we will have a class next week on class versus instance methods. So we're going to cover this in more detail, but just so you all know what this looks like, something like self dot average length, something like this. And then inside here, I could average all of my songs. That's what that would look like. Let's.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Let's go to V.
Do you mind repeating? So you said we don't want to add that column to average, what was it, the songs?
Song count.
Yeah, song count. We don't want to add that because then every time that we add a new row, it's going to have to update in 2 places. Do you mind clarifying what are those 2 places, and also clarify what Grayson said about you already have that in another place?
Yeah, so the song count is a reflection of the entries in our songs table. So we're not duplicating the exact same data, but we could calculate it based on another set of data. So the actual song count for an artist is not, the number isn't stored somewhere, but it is calculatable. Is that a word? Calculable, I think is the word, from this table. So if you can calculate something based on data you already have stored in your table or in your database, you want to do that rather than creating a new column to store that data.
So that's why you created the method.
That's why we would create a method instead, yeah. And we didn't do that, but let's do that real quick. So rather than storing this song count on the artist table, what I would want to do instead is create a method on my artist model to do this calculation. And it would look something like this.
Okay, but what if you want it to be shown in your schema, in your table?
You don't want it to be shown because then your database is not normalized yet. So the 2 places you asked this, the 2 places you have to update something is you have to, when you add a new song, you have to update the songs table to just add the new row. And then you would also have to go into the corresponding artist based on this artist ID and find that artist and increment this song count counter.
Gotcha.
So anytime you have to make changes in 2 separate places in your database, that's an indicator that your database is not normalized.
Cool. Thanks.
Aiden.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that I understand the model level instance methods. So we're storing our data in each database and then using those instance methods to actually relate that data if we wanted to pull song count, and then on the app end it would call that model method to get that answer if it was on a stats page or something. Is that generally, unless, I don't know, I'm wondering are we only using those instance methods when we don't have a method that already exists and we need to use both tables to get an answer or data, one single answer?
I think the answer to your question is yes. We create these model methods, and you said to relate data together, and a lot of times that is what we're going to be doing. We're gonna be looking for related records. You should really be creating new methods in your models to handle any data logic in your application. And also, what you said, Aiden, is correct. We're going to create these model methods when we don't have a built-in method to do this. So, for example, for our songs, song.all is a method that is built in that already gives us what we want to do. What we want to do is we want to look for all the songs, so we call song.all. We create those model methods when we want custom logic, and I think that's what it says in the lesson. But what if we need our models to be customized to perform behaviors related to our application? And yeah, it says these models can handle basic CRUD functionality through the methods that they inherit from ActiveRecord. So Aiden, I think at the end of all that, you said everything right.
Okay, thank you.
Grayson. Oh, is that from before?
No, I was just lowering it so I don't forget. But would we ever need to like cache the result of a method if it was like more costly? And if so, how would we go about doing that?
Yes. The short answer is yes. The longer answer is you would go about doing it using you would go about using the Rails built-in cache helper, and in practice you would also make use of a separate storage outside of your database and outside of your Rails app. Most commonly, the most common tool for using caching, for implementing caching in Rails is Redis. Interactive tutorial. Yeah, I don't think that's quite it. But this is what you would be looking for. And this is something that I think we also cover in Mod 3. Mod 3 curriculum has changed a little bit, so I'm not exactly sure about it. Yep. There it is. So if you are interested in exploring this, I would say this is definitely like an extension topic. This is not something we need to worry about right now. But if you're interested in it, it would be in the Mod 3 lessons. And it's caching trails. Go ahead and take a look at that.
Thanks.
And Grayson, that is a very good use case for caching. When one of these queries is maybe a little bit more complicated, we might want to cache it. Yeah. If you're sitting there and you don't necessarily know what caching is, that's totally fine. We are going to talk about it, I think, week 5 briefly. Yeah, so we can do that. Joe.
I'm not sure if you covered this. So if we have the one-to-many relationship, are we always going to create the many table through the parent table? Now that's with this exercise. I don't know if that's the right question.
I think I understand what you're asking. Let me know if this is not it. So when you say like create the table through the other table,
Yeah.
I think what you're referring to is when we can do something like this, like prints.songs.create. Yeah.
Right.
So I think the short answer is yes. We do want to prefer using this version, the lesson plan. This is another reason to look at the ActiveRecord associations without TDD if you did the TDD version, because it does go over the alternate version of doing this, which would look like this, song.create, and let's just put in the same attributes here. And then we would also add in another attribute for that artist ID, and then we could say prints.id. So you can do this version, and I think as you are, I think a lot of students find that doing it like this is better for their learning because it emphasizes the fact that we are using a foreign key, we're relating a foreign key to a primary key in our database. Whereas when we do this, it just kind of like does it under the hood for us and we don't need to worry about it. So it's really important for you all to understand that both of these 2 lines of code, 11 and 13, do the exact same thing. They are just different syntaxes. At the database level, the data is going to be stored the same way, just different syntaxes. Joe, we will prefer to use our associations whenever we can. So I would prefer to use line 13, but I will say that if for now, if you think that this version is better for you for understanding what's going on, I'm fine with you using either version. But this second version is the more like conventional way.
Okay, thanks.
Let's take a 5-minute break and we'll come back at 11:32. All right, let's jump back into it. I want to jump back into those checks for understanding, and yeah, I want to answer some of these checks for understanding. I think we could probably dispense with this first one, and we'll just focus on these three. Yeah, could I get any volunteers for what is the syntax for the following migrations in Rails? Actually, I'm gonna do some of these for us. So for this one, we're gonna need the create table command, add a column to a table with or without a data type. This is gonna be add column, and add a reference to from one table to another. This is gonna be add reference. So if I look at my migrations from this tutorial, we use create table to create our table. So we do create songs, and then we do create artists. And then we have add reference to add our reference from one table to another. I don't have an example of add column, but oh wait, I do. Yeah, that was the last one that I just did. This kind of like fake, this one that I said we don't want to do, this song count one. Can I hear from the crowd? So I think that these two questions are the ones that I really want to make sure we talk about. What does a has many, that looks kind of weird. I don't know why that's so small. What does a has many association in a model do? And what does a belongs to do? So before we like go too far into this, I just want to like kind of point out what this question is getting at. These commands that we put in our models for has many and belongs to they're very short, they're one-liners, but they are powerful. They do give us some good, some really like powerful tools. So what are some of those things? What does adding these associations into my models do? Let's hear from Brian.
I think, for instance, like when you're doing your seed file, you're able to actually reference, like you can do artist dot, or when you create a song, it can be related to it. If you'd show the seed file, I could point at it, but you can't do that without having that relationship, I believe. Like right here on line 13. You can say Prince. So we're using Prince, an artist that's already created. And because we have that has many and belongs to relationship, we can create a song with a relationship to that artist object in that variable.
Right. Yeah, so has many is going to, what does it do? Gives us the ability to relate records to each other easily. I'll say upon creation. Cool, thank you, Ryan. Phil, what do you think?
I was just playing around with this since you mentioned it, Brian. Like in a price session, in like the average song length method of the artist model, if you go in there and say like self.methods, you can see that you get access to all these like song related methods. So you can do like, obviously like .songs, but you can do .songs underscore IDs, and it returns an array of all the song IDs that belong to artists, which was just a cool thing to mention.
Let's check that out. So if I jump into my Rails console here, Phil, do you think you could walk me through a couple of those commands?
Yeah, I ran it through Price. I'm trying to think of how to get there. Do you have access to like an artist already, or would we have to create one?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So I just opened up a fresh Rails console here. How could I, so these belongs to and has many are methods for instances. So this is for a song instance, and the other one would be for an artist instance. How can I get access to an artist instance or a song instance from my IRB session? Phil or anyone else, do you have a suggestion?
Walk through this.
There's a couple commands we could run here to get access to an artist instance. Ryan, what's one we could do?
We could use find, like song.find, and by its ID, and then assign it to a variable.
Yeah, so I could say like, let's just say artist equals artist.find. Exactly. And just like you said, Ryan, this is going to find based on ID. So what I would have to do in this case is I would have to make sure that I know an artist ID. So I can kind of just like guess that there's one with the ID of 1. No, there's not an artist with ID of 1. So what I might do in this case is I might do artist.all to find all of my artists. And I can see that the first one is ID of 12. So maybe I just say artist.find 12. And that will give me, and then I'll save that to a variable like so. And now we've got an artist object. Cool. What are some other ideas? How else could I get access to an artist object? Other thoughts?
You could create one.
I could create one. Yeah, that's another way I could do it. Another thing that I want you. Oh, Gus, what do you think? Another idea?
I was gonna say just do artist.first.
Yep.
So, yeah.
Beautiful. Yeah. If I don't care which artist I get, just say .first. Give me the first one. Database. Whatever you say is the first artist. Give me that one. Similarly, we could do artist.last. Just whatever the most recently created one was, or however the database is going to get. Just give us an artist. So .first, .last, and then the other one that the lesson plan goes over a little bit is find by. If you don't want to look up by ID, I could look up by name, for instance, to find my artist for months. So there's a lot of built-in active record methods. I do want you to be familiar with everything that we've talked about in class. So your create, update, your find by, and then your associations as well. And first and last are good to know. Okay, Phil, I've got an artist object in here. Now, what do I want to do with this artist object?
Yeah, so if you to like see what you have access to, you can do artist.methods, because it's what I ran, and it gives you a long list of methods, obviously not formatted very well there. But at the very top, you can see there's a few things related to songs now that wouldn't have been there if that relationship hadn't been established in the model. I believe so. You have like on the third line there, you have a songs method. You have this songs IDs, some things related to the songs that belong to that artist now, so you can use those methods. Kind of like when we had that the spec, the setup file, that you can interact with these objects now that they're interconnected.
Yeah, that all sounds good. One thing that you are pointing out here, which is a really important concept that I want you all to take away from this lesson, is that this will create a method we can call on instances. I'll say that again. The has many and belongs to, and I'll do this for both of them. Both of these are creating methods that we can call on our instances. Just like in mod 1, you'll recall from mod 1, I think I probably have a standby. I think I have a playground. Yeah. Okay, so if I'm kind of thinking back just to mod 1 in pure Ruby, if I have like a dog class like this, and then down here I could create a dog instance, so I can say dog.new, something like this. If I add into my dog class, add a reader name, something like this, what this adder reader does under the hood is it creates a method that I can call on my dog object that will return to me the instance variable with that same name. So then this would give me the ability to call dog.name down here. And I could run this, and it shouldn't give me any errors. It's not really going to print out anything because we haven't set this instance variable, so the dog's name would just be nil. If I change this to like p dog.name, we should see a blank line. We should see nil being printed out right here. But the point stands that creating an adder reader in a class in Ruby creates a new method that we can call. Creating a has many and a similar belongs to does the exact same thing for us. So if we have has many songs, this is creating a songs method for us. If I have, let me split this to the right here. If I have a song that belongs to an artist, this gives me a method called .artist that I can call. I want you all to answer this question. I have my artist object here. When I call .songs in here, what type of object does that return to? I want you to take 30 seconds to think to yourself, what type of object is returned to us? Can I get a hand raise? What do you think? What does this return to us? James.
Yeah, it returns an array of songs.
Yes, it returns an array of songs. How could I verify that? How could I check what the class of this object is? Dee, what do you think?
You can do artist.songs.class, I think.
Yep. And this should tell us what data type it is.
Yeah. Is it an active record object as well? Like the active record object is inside the array?
I would think of it the other way, more like the array is inside of the active record object. So yeah, we see that this song class is actually not an array. We can think of it like an array. So this, let me copy and paste this here. So this is technically the class that we get, song active record associations collection proxy. So let's say this. So this will create a new method that we can call on instances. For the has many, because it will return to us multiple things, because we can have many of something. Well, let me do this first and then I'll get there. That's not what I want. Can I just paste without formatting? There we go. So it will return in an active record associations collection proxy. You can think of this as an array. So yes, James, even though technically it's not an array, it does almost all the same things that we can do with an array, including we could say like, what is the length of this thing? We could say, what is the thing in the first position in this array? And we could potentially shovel things into this array, but I'll hold off on that for a future lesson. So this method, these associations create methods that we can call in our instances. For the has many, it's going to return an active record associations collection proxy, which is essentially an array. And then we can use this array, this collection proxy, gives us the ability to relate records easily upon creation. So if we look back at our songs, if we look back at our seeds file, what we do is we take the results of this method, this .songs, and we chain our creation on top of that. So what I want you to do is when you see this dot notation, don't think of this as one method, like we're creating you can think of the end result as one method call, but under the hood, it's really two method calls. We first get that array, and then we create a new record in that array. So we can use that active record association collection proxy to relate records, and we can also use it to retrieve all of the related records. So if we don't chain on a create to it, it will just return to us what we can think of as an array of all those related records. And then for the belongs to, it's going to be very similar, but rather than returning the active record association collection proxy, let's find a song. So we'll say song equals song.first. If we do song.artist.class, we can see that this will just return to that artist. It will just return that single artist object. If I don't do .class, we can see that actual artist being returned to us. So when ActiveRecord is trying to represent a collection of things, it'll use this collection proxy object, which acts like an array. When it's just returning a single thing, it'll just return to you that object. So it returns to us the related object. Okay. What other questions do you all have?
When you say related, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's a parent relationship, correct? Like, because in this case, artist is like the parent to songs, but like, is that what you're saying? I just want to make sure I'm understanding that.
Yeah, it will return to the parent. It will return the parent, or using our one-to-many vocab, it would return the one side of the relationship. So okay. We define the belongs to on the many table, so it would return to us the related record from the one table.
Okay. I'm just gonna.
No, that's great. Any other clarifying questions? Anything I can answer for y'all? So.
Just along the same lines of like what the parent is, if you had like a song.artist, what is the class of that? Is it also an ActiveRecord association, or is it something different?
If I had, say that one more time.
So if you have, I think so right here you have your song.artist. If you ran .class on that, what would be returned?
Let me clear this out so we can see it. So what this is a class right here. So the class of artist is our artist model right here.
Gotcha. Okay.
Which is this. All right. I think this is a good place for us to wrap up class today. I am going to drop you, so before lunch, I think we've got about 10 more minutes before lunch. I want you to do 3 things for me. I want you to fill out these 2 surveys that I'm going to drop for you. So I am going to drop you 2 different ones, one for the one-to-many class and one for the ActiveRecord Associations class. The one-to-many, I do want to keep that as a separate survey because I am curious to see how you all liked the version of the inverted classroom where we read ahead of time and then just like review in class. And then similarly for the ActiveRecord Associations, I'm interested in how you all feel about the tutorial style where you work through it on your own. So yeah, I'm gonna drop you those 2 surveys. And then the third thing is I would like you to also update your Zoom if it's not up to date, so we can try to use the self-select breakout room feature in the afternoon. So I will drop all 3 of those in the cohort channel. And I think that is about it. Thank you all very much for your engagement today. And I will see you at 1. We'll be back in the same room.
Awesome. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you.
Hi, Brian. Sorry, I just had one more question briefly. And this is more of a question as to when to ask a question.
Sure.
And whether the code help channel is right for it. But when we were working on our project and we were doing the form input, we saw that there was a form tag that is a better a better method, but I have a couple of questions surrounding that. With like form input wouldn't work with the method being patch. It would only work with the method being post. Or when it did work with patch, it would then add in all of the information it was sending